helping the Nazis' efforts to build an atomic weapon. Niels Bohr was understandably mortified.
Niels Bohr was not shocked, it seems to me, by the fact that it was theoretically possible to develop an atomic bomb. He was rather shocked by the fact that Heisenberg might have been involved in such an effort.
Bohr terminated the meeting. Heisenberg never got the answer to the question he'd risked his life to ask. Should scientists like themselves apply their specialist knowledge of the atom to build an atomic weapon?
Kam sofort zu mir dann und erzählte mir, dass Bohr sozusagen sich geweigert habe, über das Problem der Bombe zu sprechen.
The meeting had lasted a matter of minutes. In that time, Bohr had gained the most shocking piece of intelligence, that his best friend, Werner Heisenberg, was helping Adolf Hitler and the Nazis build an atomic bomb. Heisenberg returned to a confident Germany, already controlling much of mainland Europe. The news that Hitler was trying to add a devastating new weapon to his armory couldn't have been more disturbing. The potential that such power was about to be placed in Hitler's hands compelled Niels Bohr, back in Copenhagen, to send a message to warn the British. Then in January 1943, Niels Bohr received a mysterious message on a tiny piece of microfilm hidden inside a key. It was a coded message from the British. It gave the first indication that both sides in the war were in a race to build a nuclear weapon. The message said there was a particular problem with which Bohr's assistance would be of the greatest help. Niels Bohr believed his departure from occupied Denmark would dent the morale of his fellow Danes. He chose to stay in Copenhagen. Then he received a warning he could not ignore. The Nazis were making horrifying plans for the Jews in Denmark. Niels Bohr and his family had no option but to flee the country. Bohr's journey was fraught with danger. In the dead of night, he set off by boat from Denmark to Sweden. The sea was heavily patrolled by German ships. In the next boat with Bohr's sons was Hilda Levy.
And then the most dramatic point came, because there came a German control boat. And the German control boat had a strong light searching over the water for all the time, trying to find people who were trying to escape. But there was a dead space between where this light came from and where it touched. That boat came, put, and we thought, well, that's the end of it. It wasn't the end of it, it was the beginning, so to speak, because we were in that dead space.
Having escaped capture on the boat journey to Sweden, Niels Bohr was hidden in a bomb bay of a British plane and flown to Britain. On his arrival in war-torn London, Niels Bohr was about to realize how close Churchill and his allies were to building their own atomic weapon. He told British intelligence every detail of his meeting with Heisenberg. Fearing what his old friend was now doing for Hitler, Niels Bohr agreed to travel on to America to join the Allies' atom bomb project.
He was, like the other physicists taking part in this development, very much afraid that if the Allies can do it, then the Germans can do it. So I think that was a strong part of his motivation. In any case, he had absolutely no moral qualms about taking part in this project.
Within months, Bohr arrived in America under an assumed name. the father of atomic physics had arrived to join the world's biggest ever industrial project at Los Alamos in New Mexico. The Allies had plowed in hundreds of millions of dollars to be the first to build an atomic weapon. Niels Bohr's dedication to the Allies' atomic project was built on his well-founded fear of what Heisenberg might be creating for the Nazis. The two friends were now in a head-to-head race to build the atomic bomb. Or so it seemed. Within months of Heisenberg's return from Copenhagen, German military ambitions had been severely curtailed. With the Americans' entry into the war, the Nazis' hopes of winning had started fading. Hitler issued new orders. With the German economy crippled, only military research which would produce a usable weapon inside a year would now be funded. Albert Speer, Hitler's armaments minister, summoned Heisenberg. Speer asked if Heisenberg's team could deliver the bomb in time. He offered a huge cash injection. It seemed the Germans were ready to gamble the entire war effort on building an atomic bomb. Heisenberg had to make a fateful decision, a decision that would determine his place in history. He told Speer that the technical hurdles to building an atomic weapon were immense and would take years to overcome.
Heisenberg said, well, first we don't have the engineers, second we don't have the physicists. It's absolutely, it's impossible. We can't do that.
On Heisenberg's advice, the Nazis decided not to proceed with the bomb. His team moved to the German countryside. The heart of their operation became a small disused beer cellar under a church. Their prototype reactor was now intended to generate power for peacetime. For Heisenberg, the moral burden of running Hitler's atomic bomb project had been lifted from his shoulders. On the 6th of August 1945, the immense destructive power of the atom was used for the first time at Hiroshima. Heisenberg and his colleagues had been arrested and imprisoned in a country house in England, where they heard the news that the bomb had been dropped.
Man war natürlich schockiert. Natürlich waren wir schockiert. Aber wir hatten ja eben gesehen, dass es sehr schwierig war, eine Bombe zu bauen.
Once released by the British, Heisenberg found himself shunned by colleagues around the world, including many of his old friends. Some refused even to shake his hand.
They attacked him as if he was not the prisoner released, but as if he was actually the one who imprisoned people in Germany, that he built the bomb for Hitler and accused him of this and that, and he said, I haven't done anything of that.
Heisenberg explained his wartime activities to former colleagues. He said he'd worked on the project because he wanted to know whether an atomic weapon was feasible. When he realized it was, Heisenberg claimed he went to Copenhagen to take Niels Bohr's advice on whether it was morally right to proceed. But there were many who thought that he'd already stepped over that moral line by pursuing his curiosity on the Nazis' behalf.
Apparently, Heisenberg believed that there was a moral right for a scientist to work on these endeavors. However, I think we scientists have to realize that we don't work in a vacuum. The scientists cannot be naive. We have to realize that in some sense we are tools to provide the military with weapons, hideous weapons, maybe weapons of self-defense, but also weapons of offense as well. So I think that in this sense, Heisenberg was naive. He wanted the right to pursue his intellectual curiosity. He wanted the right to make Germany a proud, great nation, but for what purpose?
Heisenberg was facing the rejection of scientists all over the world. But there was one man whose friendship he was desperate to have back. Heisenberg was eager to find out what Niels Bohr now thought of him. Niels Bohr seemed surprisingly keen to rekindle his friendship with Werner Heisenberg. In October 1945, Niels Bohr was back in Copenhagen and wrote to Heisenberg for the first time in 6 years.
I hope that it shall not be long before we can take up our old collaboration. I trust that we shall all see happier days, and that the horrors brought over innocent people by men blinded by prejudice will be a lesson to all mankind.
Heisenberg welcomed the letter, but he felt that their closeness could only be restored if he and Bohr cleared up their misunderstanding over the wartime meeting. Heisenberg repeated his explanation of why he went to Copenhagen in an interview 20 years later.
I felt that it was good to ask Bohr's advice. Now, of course, I knew that Bohr was a Dane and Denmark was occupied by German troops, so it was obvious that Bohr would have very strong feelings in this matter. At the same time, I felt that Bohr and I were good friends, and he knew my attitude to problems of this kind from earlier years, so I felt that still this would be a good basis for confidence and for conversation on this problem.
But Bohr had no wish to discuss the past and insisted that the subject of the meeting was out of bounds. But Heisenberg wouldn't let it drop.
Heisenberg insisted with Bohr whenever he was together to say, can we talk about that? And Bohr said, now let's stop it. I mean, we have talked so much about it. Let's leave it. You know, I have finished the subject for myself. And Heisenberg said, this is not sufficient for me. He said, look, I'm not looking for absolution. That's not my point. But it hurts me that you, with whom I have worked so closely and I admire and whom I have learned so much, that you don't trust my intention, because that hurts me.
As long as Bohr refused to discuss their meeting, Heisenberg knew he would see it as a hostile visit. But Heisenberg wanted Bohr to accept he had in fact come in peace. Heisenberg was about to make his point to the whole world. In 1956, a book was published which suggested Heisenberg had in fact led a plot to deny Hitler the bomb. The book claimed Heisenberg's mission in meeting Bohr was to do a deal with him. He would stop the Germans getting the bomb if Bohr would use his international contacts to stop physicists elsewhere developing the bomb for any other country. Heisenberg was no longer portrayed as a villain, but as a hero. In a letter to the author printed in later editions of the book, Heisenberg appeared to endorse this radical new version of what had happened.
This situation at this time gave physicists decisive influence over further developments, since they could argue with the government that atomic bombs would probably not be available during the course of the war.
It was a dramatically different